Welcome to Canine Social Behaviour and Communication. I'm going to hand over to Angelica Steinker, who is your presenter for today.
Hi guys, welcome to Canine and Social Behavior and Communication again. I'm Angelica, and this is going to be my absolute favorite part of this presentation. It has some really interesting stuff in it. And so let's get the party started. You guys have already seen my credentials and the two other parts, so here's the slide. If you want to review that, you're welcome to. These are Nikki's credentials. You've also seen this twice by now, so here they are. If you want to review them, there they are. Okay, the presentation format. We're going to have videos in this presentation. There's a total of 9. The email links are labeled and numbered. Nikki will be cutting and pasting them for you guys. And as usual, this method gives access to all the folks who are watching this to be able to see the videos. Since different mediums take different times to load and all that kind of stuff, this is the best way to do it. Today, we're going to learn about stress and alarm signals, canine rivalry, facial expressions, which is just so awesome, and my favorite, emotional contagion. Stress and alarm signals. Many signals dogs create are similar to our own. So one of the things that I use a lot with clients is I have them watch me make a facial expression that's similar to the dog that they have that's making the same expression, and in an attempt to get them to recognize what the dog is communicating. And once you put it to them in a human facial expression, they can often recognize it much more easily. So if you're having a difficult time reading a dog, one thing that you can do is mimic the facial expression or the body posture, and a lot of times that can help you get in touch with what that may mean. Comparing to human signals, as I just said, often helps humans to identify the signs of stress in dogs, and often humans are kind of face blind with dogs because the fur and the forelegs just causes them to not see the signals. So by teaching our clients body language and by learning it ourselves, we can open clients' eyes. Some typical signs of stress. There's a whole bunch of signs of stress in your manual. So this is only a partial list. The list in your manual is much more complete. But here are some signs: panting, yawning, drooling, sniffing the ground, scratching the body, and shaking as if wet. With sniffing, I just want to say really quick, you know, obviously there are times that your dog is truly just sniffing, so or the client's dog is just sniffing, so it's the way that they sniff. Often a dog that's coming into an area that has a lot of dog scent, that is dog reactive, will do this really intense sniffing when they first enter the building or the facility where they're smelling all this dog scent. And it's that kind of really intense sniffing that I would definitely consider a sign of stress, more times than not. Okay, so another sign of stress is vocalization, barking and whining. Obviously, any sort of body tension or trembling is going to be trembling is going to be a severe sign of stress. Tension could be mild or severe depending on what's going on with the rest of the dog's body. Loss of bladder or bowel control is going to be a severe sign of stress. Oftentimes at my school, if a dog comes in that's severely dog aggressive, they will urinate or defecate, and often it will be a very loose bowel movement. So, you know, that's an important clue. Sudden shedding of hair is also a sign of stress. Signs of alarm: dilated pupils, widened eyes so that the eyelids are actually open more so the whites of the eyes are showing. This is called wheel eye. Piloerection, which is the raising of the hackles, the hair on the dog's back, can also be a sign of alarm. Piloerection isn't always a sign of alarm, but it can be a sign of alarm. Signals often interpreted as signs of dominance. So when a dog is showing alarm, it's very common for a dog owner to then label that dominant. If a dog owner labels anything dominant in a conversation with you, I strongly recommend asking them, how does that look? Because people are going to label a wide variety of body language dominant, and so it's going to be very confusing if you run with that label. In general, signs of alarm just simply reflect a dog's increased arousal state. And if the dog is responding to the arousal state with a fight response, aggressive behaviors may follow. Warning signals. Typically, dogs give warning signals when they're uncomfortable. Some of those warning signals, and again, this depends on the individual and on the history of the individual, but some typical warning signals can be a direct stare, a still rigid body, growl, whale eye, ears flat against the head, closed tense mouth, and breath holding. If a warning is disregarded, the dog could potentially follow it up with aggressive behavior. So warnings should always be paid attention to and heeded. I work with a lot of super reactive dogs, and a lot of people ask me if I am afraid or if I worry, and the truth is I very, very, very rarely am worried about an aggressive dog I'm working with, because it's typically very easy to read the warning signs. So anyway, you always need to listen and pay attention to the warning signs. Very, very important. Dogs that have been punished for either showing signs of stress, such as growling, or reactivity, barking, lunging, or warning to stop, lip curl, stuff like that, will stop displaying warning signs. And these dogs end up being a lot more dangerous, and so this is one of the many reasons not to use punishment. In general, positive punishment is not a good idea, but when it comes to aggression, you really want to avoid all forms of punishment because it can really cause massive problems. So, canine aggression is deemed as any behavior meant to intimidate or harm. Aggression is not a behavioral problem per se. So the definition of aggression is any act that is meant to intimidate, scare, or physically hurt another dog or person. A behavioral problem is going to be anything, any behavior the owner has a problem with. So, you know, for one owner it may be a problem that the dog's jumping on the furniture. For another owner it may not. So very, very different dynamics involved. Talking about aggression, we generally have two types. There's offensive aggression and there's defensive aggression. So offensive aggression is anger and ask questions later. Defensive aggression is a form of self-defense. The dog's emotional state is also fearful but also anxious, and it could also become angry. The animal could become angry, and really the dog would prefer to flee, but since he can't because he may be on leash, which is very common, in a crate, or because he's cornered, he's going to try to defend himself. Dogs can fluctuate between defensive and offensive aggression, so it's important to understand that they are, yes, categories, but that just because you've categorized a dog as one or the other doesn't mean he's going to neatly fit that box always forever. Offensive aggression. The body language of a dog that's offensive is going to be he's going to try to make himself appear larger. His ears and his tail are going to be raised because, again, he's trying to appear larger. His weight is probably going to be forward onto the front legs, and his body is going to be stiff with, again, as previously discussed, that tricky tail wag, which can really throw people. So you can have a dog that is completely offensive body language and the tail is wagging, and all the people see is that tail wagging. They don't see any other part of the dog's body. Very dangerous. Offensive aggression can also include a snarl, which is referred to as an agonistic pucker. And I inserted a little picture here of a agonistic pucker. Notice how only the front of the dog's teeth are visible, and the corners of the mouth are somewhat pulled forward, almost in an O shape, and that's what's typically called an agonistic pucker. The back teeth are not necessarily visible, which, as you see in this picture, and the muzzle is wrinkled. Of course, some breeds that's not going to be the case, but here you see, I'm going to guess maybe a golden mix, or I don't know, I'm not really sure. But anyway, you see clear wrinkling on his muzzle behind his nose. And dogs may stare directly at the persons that they are threatening. This is a big clue because then you know what they're threatening because they're staring at what they're threatening. So that's always very helpful. Defensive aggression. In this case, the dog is going to try to make their body appear smaller, so they may be crouched. Their tail is probably tucked, and their ears are likely more flattened against their head, and you can see in this drawing how kind of the front end is a little more lower than the back end. But the dog's kind of like, okay, I really don't mean no harm, please don't mess with me. But then if further pushed or threatened, they may very well react with a bite. Okay, so in defensive aggression, the weight may be on the dog's hind legs. The dog may growl, but the mouth is going to be open wider, as pictured here. So even the teeth in the back of the mouth are more visible, and he's going to be avoiding direct eye contact, which you can see this Labrador doing in this picture. In defensive aggression, a dog may show some of the alarms or appeasement signals that we've discussed before. So whale eye, dilated pupils, paw lifting, rolling on back while still biting to protect themselves are all possibilities with defensive aggression. And you can see how this can get a little complicated because it could be like a ball of stuff that you have alarm, appeasement, and stress signs all kind of curled into one. But if you look at the whole dog, you can almost always get a clear reading. Okay, mixed emotions. A dog may show a whale eye, which would be defensive, even though the ears and the tail are erect, which is offensive. So, like humans, dogs often experience mixed emotions. In any given situation, their body language can be ambiguous. They can be feeling more than one thing. I worked with a dog recently that really liked people, but really also was afraid of them. And so you constantly saw her toggling back and forth between, oh my gosh, I really like you, but don't touch me. And then, I really want to be close to you, but oh my gosh, you just moved. So it's can be tricky, but again, if you're looking at the whole dog and you're looking at as much as you can at the whole room, the whole environment, you can pretty much figure it out. And it's important to always take the entire situation and context into consideration. Interpreting a dog's body language. So when you're interpreting the signals, it's really important to look at the dog's individuality, their situation, and the context, because sometimes a yawn is just a yawn, but sometimes it's a sign for massive trouble. Ethogram. So an ethogram is what refers to the work of listing a dog's individual signs of stress and joy. So once I take a dog, for example here, this dog is my Border Collie Zumi, and I write down all his individual signs of stress, and I write down all his individual signs of joy, then I truly can use that to understand where he's at any given moment. And I could even give that to somebody else, to another professional, or to even a client who's going to work my dog and say, this is how he communicates joy, this is how he communicates stress. So it's very empowering to all beings involved when you do an ethogram. A sign of stress is going to be an indication that we need to modify the environment, help reduce the stress for the dog. Stress is always ideally reduced. And a sign of joy is going to mean, yeah, we're on the right track. Learning should be fun. So no matter what we're training, joy needs to be a part of it. Okay, this is one of my favorite slides. I love this because this slide shows a dog's nose and the whiskers, and specifically the whisker bed. And so what are somewhat erect, they're somewhat forward. And again, if you know your dog or you understand breeds and you've read a lot of dogs, you may know that this is a really important clue. Why are this dog's whiskers so forward when they're not usually this far forward? And then what you can do is you can use that detail and look at the whole dog's body and then look at the whole environment to ascertain what's going on. So that's a great way to toggle back and forth between a small detail that you're seeing and the dog's entire body and the entire area. When you're doing that, you want to watch for sudden or subtle changes in the dog's signals. For example, with the whisker bed, are the whiskers coming forward as I reach for the dog? Well, this is a big clue. This is a sign of stress. This could be a sign of trouble. So if you're not certain that it just happened when you reached forward because you only saw it out of the corner of your eye, you can reach forward again. Just don't reach forward even further. And see if, again, you get that same response from the dog. And that's a way to just kind of do a little experiment and see, okay, is this motion really what's causing the whiskers to come forward? And again, that enables you to then get a good read on what's going on. A really awesome way to figure out what's going on is to watch the trajectory of the dog's glances or stares. Oftentimes, if you're reaching for the dog and they're worried, they're going to be looking at your hand. They might be looking at you, but probably they're going to be looking at your hand. If they're looking at you or they're looking at the hand, that's a pretty big clue that if they're then showing a sign of stress, that you're causing that sign of stress because they're looking at you. If they're looking at another dog and you happen to reach forward at the same time and the whiskers go forward, then you have the question of, is it you reaching or is it the dog? And you may want to eliminate one thing from the environment, such as the other dog, and then just reach, and then do the opposite, have you not reach, and then just have the other dog there, and then observe again for signs of stress. Always honor your red flags. It's so important. I can't tell you guys how many times I've heard a client tell me, well, I had a funny feeling, and they didn't act on that feeling, and then something tragic happened. So it's very, very important to honor your red flags and to empower your clients to honor their red flags. If they say something like, well, I was wondering if this might cause stress, they're probably right. Clients intuitively know their dogs very well most of the time, so it's really important to listen to what they're saying, to empower them, and to honor those red flags. In order to avoid tragedies, we want to be proactive. So, you know, it's better to prevent a dog fight. It's better to prevent a nip of a person or, gosh forbid, a bite of a person than to, I don't know, think about what you could have done after the fact. So it's so important when it comes to aggression to be proactive. I do encourage everyone to always assume the worst. You want to just assume that the dog is a biter, even if they're not. If you're not certain, it's always better to assume the worst. If a dog is showing a lot of stress, they're at risk for biting. If they're showing a lot of stress with people, if they're showing a lot of stress with dogs, they're at risk for creating a dog fight. Assume that the dog is more dangerous than you think that they even are, because it's always going to help you be proactive and preventing tragedies. Don't listen to what other people say. Oftentimes, all of us are subject to obedience to authority, and a presenter may, you're at a seminar and a presenter may pressure you to do something. Always know that you have the right to say no. Always know that you can just not do something if you think it's not going to be a good thing for your dog. And again, more importantly, educate your clients. Everybody on the planet is a dog trainer now, and so everybody on the planet has an opinion. One of the most damaging opinions is that aggressive dogs need to be socialized, which is definitely not the case. So it's really important to explain to clients that you don't want to listen to what other people say. You want to listen to what science says, and you need to trust your trainer and listen to what your trainer or your dog behavior consultant tells you. Another really common tragic statement is, my dog is friendly, which is often followed by the phrase, oh, he's never done that before, which also can lead to a tragedy. And I also strongly recommend that you advocate that your clients avoid dog parks. I know that's a tough one because some people don't have fence yards, but they can go at off times or when nobody's there. And I also generally advocate against daycares because most of them are not operated in a safe fashion. Most daycare staff are not properly trained in reading dog body language or signs of stress, so dogs are flooded and come home exhausted rather than having had a good experience. And for a dog that's kind of teetering on the edge of having issues, that can often be catastrophic. Canine rivalry. So this refers to two dogs in the same household fighting, and this is very, very dangerous. Obviously, any dog fight in any situation is dangerous, but when they're fighting in a person's home, it's so incredibly dangerous because the human could be laying on a bed, the dogs are snuggling up next to each other, suddenly a fight breaks out. The human is in a laying down position, which makes that human very vulnerable. They could be laying on a sofa, they could be sitting on the floor. Also, oftentimes, when their own dogs are involved, owners get incredibly emotionally reactive to a dog fight, and this can just really feed in to a dog fight. So one of the most important things is if there is a dog fight, remain calm. Dog fights are always dangerous to humans. There is no safe way to break up a fight. Kids have to be trained to lock themselves in a room, and I'm telling you guys right now, the younger kids are not going to be able to do that. They're just going to freeze probably. They're either going to start screaming, crying, or freeze. But if they're only young children in the home, it's a really dangerous situation if there's dogs fighting. If there's older kids and younger kids, then you could possibly install some sort of buddy system where the older kid takes the younger kid out of the room. If there are toddlers or infants, this is just crazy dangerous stuff. Oftentimes, the more dogs people have, the more likely they are to have fights. And so, if you have a smaller area and more dogs, you're going to more likely have dog fights. If you have a bigger area and fewer dogs, you're going to probably be in a better place. So in general, the people that in 15 years of doing this, the people that I've worked with that have more than 5 dogs almost always have dog fights. So one way to prevent dog fights is to keep the numbers down. The safest way to break up a dog fight, number one, remain calm, really important. And number two, grab the dog that is the more aggressive one. If you can tell, the one that is winning, the one that's kind of shoving the other one on their back, the one that appears to be physically stronger, grab that one by the tail or hind leg and lift up. This is obviously not a nice thing to do to a dog, but this is the safest way because this way you're staying away from the biting part of the dog. You're working on the opposite end. If they don't have a tail or if the tail has been removed, a hind leg is the only thing that you have to work with. Oftentimes females don't have the physical strength to lift a dog up. If they're 30, 40, 50, 100 pounds, we can't do that. So you may want to use something where you can tie a leash around the dog's waist, that's the aggressor, and then drag that dog to something, to a heavy piece of furniture, a piece of fencing, something that you can tie the other end of the leash to, and then you do that to the second dog. If they are clamped on each other, do not attempt to pry any mouth open. Do not try to pull on the dogs to get them to open the mouth. That a lot of times will tear the skin. So just wait. At some point, even terriers or pit bulls will let go. In my experience, water or citronella have a 50% chance of working. In my experience with fighting stock pits or terriers, you're probably wasting time and energy doing anything with water or citronella. the change in environment until the fight is over. They're just very, very intense fighters, and they do tend to clamp and just kind of go into a zone. For those dogs, fighting is self-reinforcing. So they're actually doing something they're really enjoying, and they're doing something that's really fun, and that makes it much more fun. It makes it much harder for them to want to stop the activity, whereas two dogs that normally get along having a fight are going to be like, oh, phew, okay, yeah, let's get that over with. So fighting stock pits are usually really awesome with people, but they have been genetically abused to want to fight other dogs, and as a result, they will do things like give appeasement signals. They'll actually lay on their backs and appear to be giving in to the other dog, only to then reach up underneath and try to go for their neck. So fighting stock pits can be really, really, really tricky to work with in terms of dog reactivity. And again, they can be self-reinforced by fighting, and they can do very, very intense damage. So they're often best as only dogs, and if you live in any sort of rural area, you're going to have fighting stock pits in your city. It's just how it is. So they are everywhere. They're all over the United States, and there's lots and lots and lots of people fighting dogs. I happen to live in a city where dog fights are very popular, and it's a big problem. So we have a ton of fighting stock pits where I live. Okay, canine rivalry. Initially, for dogs that are living together, it may only be snarls, growls, or snaps, and there may not actually be any injury. It's really important to understand that oftentimes humans are just creating more of a problem than they actually had. And how this typically works is, dog A will growl at dog B, and the human will walk up and swat dog A in the face and be like, yeah, I took care of that, and I showed him, and I was alpha, and now he'll know not to do that again. So dog A develops a different strategy. Dog A says, well, when I want to kick dog B's butt, last thing I'm going to do is growl first. So in reality, what the human has done is escalated the situation. Now a dog fight is much, much more likely. So when conflict is handled inappropriately, it's going to intensify, and it can really make for much, much worse problems and much worse injuries. Usually there are signs that the interactions between the dogs are problematic. In this picture, I don't see any sort of problem. Everybody seems to be getting along fine, but oftentimes there are indications, and as we've been discussing throughout this entire series of presentations, it's easy for humans to miss them. So if there are subtle signs of stress, if there's appeasement, if there's a lot of distance, increasing behaviors happening between dogs, that group of dogs is automatically at risk for fighting. Conflicts can occur between any animal, obviously a dog and a cat, and so on and so forth. It's more likely to occur between males. This is what the research shows. It's more likely to occur with unneutered males. So whether one is neutered and the other one isn't, whoever is not neutered is more likely to be aggressive. So being in an intact male does positively correlate with aggression. Dogs fighting is more likely to happen during times of change or stress. So if people are having a divorce, they moved, they added another dog, a dog died. These are the times that you often can predict that there may be problems. 2 or more female dogs fighting is generally going to mean more damage than when male dogs fight, and they tend to be a lot more vicious about it. So when I do consults for canine rivalry and it's 2 bitches fighting, I always tell the owners this is the worst case scenario. This is really very, very dangerous, and you have to be very careful. Common causes for canine rivalry. If you just quickly scan this list, you will notice dominance is not on it. It's just simply not an equation. It's actually about resources most of the time, and resources are food, toys, water bowl, a favorite being's kitchen, because it's associated with food, favorite beds, sofas, so on and so forth, and then I jokingly say air molecules, which is aka space. Now, scientifically, dominance refers to two beings of the same species fighting over a resource. So canine rivalry could include that. But what I want to point out here is that we don't want to be reactive. We don't want to use dominance theory to predict who will win the fight over the toy, the food, the water bowl, whatever it may be, which is what dominance theory does. It's what it has to offer us, is the prediction of who will win that fight. We want to not have the fight in the first place. So it's really important to understand, yes, dominance exists, but it doesn't have a useful thing to offer us in terms of canine rivalry, because predicting who's going to win is simply not helpful. The other thing I want to say about that is oftentimes who wins depends. It depends on the circumstances and it depends on the resource. So again, how useful is it to say, well, in this dog fight, dog A will win, but in the same situation, in the same household, if it happens outside, dog B will win. Well, again, how useful is that? We want to work to prevent any sort of dog fight in the first place. Teaching dogs to share and playing respondent conditioning games often elicits improvement. So that's your ticket. At least 90% of the time you can get improvement by playing sharing games and playing respondent conditioning games. Rivalry oftentimes includes one dog bullying another dog or dogs in the same household. It's really important not to support the bully, but rather to teach the bully to share. We used to think that you want to support the bully, that, you know, that was a problem. The unfortunate thing with that is that once you support the bully just bullies even more. And so you end up having things like, you know, a dog that was resource guarding one toy that now takes 20 toys into the narrow hallway, lays them on the ground, doesn't let any other dogs in the household pass through that hallway because he's resource guarding his toys. So you can very rapidly change a minor problem into a major problem if you're supporting the dog by supporting the dog that is bullying. So bullying behavior often responds well to timeout. That's a little bit beyond the scope of this webinar, but there you go. It's a little golden nugget. Aggression statistics. This is not designed to teach you how to change aggressive behaviors. This is a high-level look at dog aggression. So here we go. Some really sobering statistics. 76% of fatal dog bite incidences in the United States occur on the dog owner's property. Many dogs involved in fatal attacks were chained. So the single most dangerous thing that you can do or a client can do is chain. I am very lucky. I live in a county that has outlawed chaining, and I'm very, very, very happy about that. Research has shown that many dogs involved in bite cases had been trained using traditional compulsion and punitive methods. Aggression begets aggression. If you are violent with your dog can, and in some cases will, become violent. The most dangerous breed of dog is not the pit bull, but the wolf hybrid. And here is the resource for those statistics, Fatal Dog Attacks, a book written by Karen DeLise, and here's the website that corresponds with that book. I strongly recommend that anybody who works with dogs, loves dogs, is a trainer, a dog behavior consultant, read and internalize this book. Karen DeLise has also written a few other books. I recommend all of her books. She's extremely good. Preventing aggression. Select an appropriate dog. If you like to have more than one dog, terrier or a pit bull is probably not a good choice. You need to exercise your dog, coach your clients to their dogs. I'm not saying select the appropriate dog for clients, because they never do. They just buy a dog that, you know, they have in their head is cute or whatever. So I've kind of given up on that. And 15 years being a professional dog behavior consultant, I have never sold the service of a pre-purchase consult, and I have given it away twice. So that just shows you it's just not something that people are interested in. Socializing your dog is incredibly important. Of course, socialization needs to be appropriate. It can't be torture. It can't be flooding. And doing appropriate socialization is much more complicated than people realize. You, of course, want to train your dog. That's a really great way to prevent aggression. And you want to manage the dog's environment. Certain breeds, such as terriers and herding breeds, are often off-road sports cars and not necessarily suitable for the pet home. Predation. Predation is not aggression. This is really important because a lot of times people will label it as such. If the family dog is trying to eat the family cat, you know, they'll call it aggression, but it's not if the dog is being predatory. Predatory predation has a really not good history of responding to behavior modification, because it's generally behavior that an animal is engaging in to, you know, obtain a food source. It's a natural drive, and if a dog has grabbed a small dog thinking they were prey, the safest thing for everybody involved is to assume that even with training, that dog will grab another small dog again with the intent to harm. So predation is not something that we ever kid ourselves to be able to modify. Having said that, some dogs are really great with cats. A lot of times having been raised with them is a important factor. And some animals are just naturally very gentle. But again, predation is not something that's subject to behavior modification. Predatory drift is normal dog behavior, and it derives from predatory action patterns. And again, that doesn't mean it's aggression. And it's a respondent thing that's triggered by fleeing movement or small furry beings. And it's really obviously horrible if a dog kills another pet, but you can't ever assume they're not going to do it again. Predation is not subject to behavior modification. Good luck teaching a terrier not to kill small furry animals. That's what they were bred to do for hundreds of years, and that's what they're going to do. And maybe with the use of punishment you can stop the behavior in your presence, but the moment you turn your back, they're going to do it. And I would just say it's much easier to just keep your terrier away from your pet rat than to punish your dog for something that's absolutely natural for them. This is a really cool image on the left-hand side. It's the canine predatory sequence. So the first step is the animal orients to where the being is that they're considering as prey. Then they start to eye. Then they start to stalk. Then they chase. Then they grab bite. Then they kill bite. Then they dissect, and then they consume. Domestication has taken this predatory sequence and picked out certain things. So for the Border Collie, the breeders have selected eye and stalk, and for the Sighthounds, the breeders have selected chase, and for the Retrievers, they have selected grab bite. But theoretically, all domesticated dogs should not be going to the kill, bite, dissect, and consume. However, domestication is a process that is reversible, and of course, some dogs just don't exhibit the genetics, and they do finish, and that's what it's called if they kill, bite, and in some cases dissect and consume. Dog aggression is complicated and an extensive subject, and so we just want to emphasize that you only work with aggression if you have the appropriate training, experience, and that you have a mentor on hand that's going to help you. It is really, really tricky stuff, and you can get yourself painted in a corner really quickly. We're now going to discuss dog bite progression. So this is a very important subject. The dog bite sequence generally is the dog freezes and shows discomfort, signs of stress. Growling is the second progression, snapping, and then biting. Again, dogs that have been punished for warning signals for signs of stress will usually not show warnings, and they can just go straight from literally just looking glazed over to biting. Each step that I just showed you has a threshold. When the dog has reached that threshold, they're going to exhibit that behavior. The first behavior is a warning. If that fails, then the dog's going to move on to the next level. Again, there are individual differences here, guys. There's dogs that go from 0 to 100 real quickly, and there's dogs that that may give multiple warnings at each level. That's great. That's wonderful if they give a lot of warnings, especially if people are heeding them. So these are just guidelines. Every dog is an individual, so don't think this is etched in stone. By the time the dog is snapping, the owners usually have missed all of the previous signals, and oftentimes they've been occurring for months or years. And so then, you know, frequently we hear things like, "Oh, well, the bite came out of nowhere," and often it did not. The exception to that is, of course, the dogs that have been suppressed. Again, punishment is dangerous because it stops behavior, and that sounds really counterintuitive. Don't we want to stop aggressive behavior? Well, yeah, but we need to get at the root cause, not just Band-Aid it, not just throw a little quick fix on it that makes it look like it's fixed. Negative reinforcement when it comes to aggression is also very problematic and not recommended. Aggression is actually an emotional issue, not a behavior issue, so what you really need to modify is the dog's emotional state, and that's beyond the scope of what we're covering today. Stopping behavior, again, removes the warning signal, so the barking will go away, the lunging will go away, the growling will go away, the signs of stress will go away, and we have a more dangerous dog. Canine emotions. Emotions can be observed in body language and can be verified via consent testing and two-way communication. So that's what we're going to talk about now. My favorite. What are emotions? According to Wikipedia, the physiology of emotion is closely linked to arousal of the nervous system with various states and strengths of arousal relating apparently to particular emotions. Fear usually occurs in response to a threat. The cognition of danger leads to the arousal of the nervous system, which means a rapid heartbeat, breathing, sweating, and muscle tension. So you guys have gone through the operant conditioning course, and obviously an animal that has a rapid heartbeat, that is breathing rapidly, sweating, and has muscle tension is not in an ideal learning state. So if danger or there's lack of safety, training is going to be substandard, impossible, or inadequate at best. Research on emotions has increased a lot over the past 2 decades. It used to be kind of the stepchild, but it's become more and more popular, predominantly because we now have technologies that enable us to research emotions. And the areas of academia that cover emotions are psychology, neuroscience, medicine, history, sociology, and computer science. So this is just really an area that's exploding right now. It's just fascinating. Emotion is a subjective experience of a dog to an internal and or external event. So this is really important because sometimes we can't tell what a dog is upset over, and we just look all around and the dog has his body posture like the sky is falling and he just looks all upset. and we just don't see anything. He doesn't seem to be looking at anything in particular. And so that can be an internal event. That dog may be experiencing some sort of wave of internal anxiety because of a medical reason, because of a hormonal problem. You know, that may not necessarily be known, but it's really important to understand that emotion is a subjective experience that is the result of internal and or external events. So it could be something happening internally. Humans can often read emotions in dog body language via signs of stress and joy. And that is a statement that is absolutely substantiated by science now, because we have had some recent studies. So this is not just our professional opinion, this is really reality. While we may not be able to verbally ask a dog what emotion they are feeling, we can use things that we're going to learn about today, consent testing and two-way communication, to find out if the dog says yes, no, or maybe. So consent testing, how does that work? It's possible to ask a dog, and we've done this for many, many years, which reinforcer they prefer, right? You take a piece of hot dog and you take a piece of cheese and you present both to the dog, and you watch really carefully which one they snatch up first and which one they're eating more enthusiastically, and you know which one they prefer. So that's a form of consent testing where you say, okay, which one do you like? And you're listening to them on which item they prefer. So is it possible to ask your dog if they want to interact with you? If you pick up your dog, say, and the dog pushes off and moves away from you, that would be a no. And if your dog moves closer or doesn't move away, that could be a yes. So again, knowing your dog is really important in terms of understanding understanding what means yes and what means no. And this is me and my dog Power, who loves to snuggle. So he's saying yes. Okay, so here we have our first video. This is a consent test between a dog and a human, and this is an example of the dog saying no. Nikki has posted the link in the chat area, and you guys can click on that link now, and then we'll be back in a couple of seconds and continue with the presentation. Okay. So, how would you do dog-to-dog consent testing? For example, if you have puppies playing, a really great way to find out if a puppy in particular is enjoying play, let's say two puppies are tossing each other about, and one of them you kind of feel like he keeps getting pushed on the bottom, and it looks a little rough to you, and you're just wondering, is this little dude really enjoying this play session, or is he getting pummeled? So what you can do is take that particular puppy and pull him out of play and let him go. So if he rejoins play, that's a yes. I want to play. I like what's going on. And some dogs like to be pummeled. And if he goes and hides under a chair or doesn't even run away, just hovers underneath you, then that's a no. And you know that that is not a session of play that this particular puppy is enjoying. And that's so important to do because, as previously mentioned, socialization should be fun. Okay, so adult dogs can also be consent tested. You can teach them to look at each other on cue, and this is not something that we're going to cover here, but it's something that's rather simple. You then give the dog the cue, and then you can teach them ultimately to say hi, and you empower them when you say, do you want to go say hi? That they can either go or not. So The cue is not a demand, it is a request, and it's something that they can choose to do or not do. And then ultimately when you give that cue, go say hi, you can observe their body language. So here we see an example of that. Consent testing with 2 dogs, and this particular dog says no. The link has already been posted, and again, I'll be back in a few seconds after we've watched this. Okay, so Nikki just posted, she accidentally posted the wrong video, so she's just posted the link that is the correct one. So the video for consent test with 2 dogs is the correct video. Okay. All right, so if you perform a consent test and you get a yes, do not take it personally. That dog just said yes, or the dog says no, but it's really important to not take it personally, irregardless of it being a yes or no. You always work your reinforcement history, which means you play food games, toy games, and no food, no toy games. And if you get a no, as I just said, you also don't take it personally, and you're still going to work your reinforcement history, irregardless. And now we're going to look at a conflicted consent test. So this is dog and human, and the dog is conflicted. So that's a lot of fun. And Nikki's going to be posting the link in just a moment. This is video 5. And I will be back in a moment. Okay. All right. Again, if you get a conflicted response, do not take it personally and work your reinforcement history. Two-way communication. This is a means by which we teach a dog several concepts to empower him or her to tell us if he wants to move forward with something or not, if he's worried about something or not. The ideal way to do that is the look game. Also, I strongly recommend an ethogram, which is also a really great way to have two-way communication. That way your dog shows stress, and your dog learns, oh, when I show stress, Mom helps me with that, Dad helps me with that, and removes me from that environment. Their ability to feel safer increases. That increases reinforcement history, decreases issues, and so on and so forth. So ethograms are a fantastic way to listen to our dog's emotional states. Two-way communication also empowers us to ask questions. So for example, if you've taught your dog the look game, you can ask him to look at something that you can, from previous data gathering, know he or she may find stressful, and then you can use that game to ascertain what's going on. If the dog's offering the look game, you can use the trajectory of the glance, as previously discussed, to determine if there's something that they're worried about, and if they're not looking at it, if they're offering a fake look, that can also be great information in terms of, well, obviously he's not worried about that. Dogs will generally want to glance or stare at things that they're worried about. There are some exceptions to that, but again, that's beyond the scope. Okay, facial expressions. Dogs and humans share many of the facial expressions, so this is just so completely fascinating and interesting. So if I go back to the previous slide and you just kind of scan all those facial expressions, and then looky here, this shepherd is so expressive. I mean, there are a whole bunch of different expressions here, and it's just fascinating. Anyway, so in Behavioral Processes, which is an academic journal, and I believe it's currently in press, they have done a study, Tina Bloom and Harris Friedman, where humans accurately read dogs' emotional facial expressions. What they did to make that happen is they used photographs of dogs' faces that were taken under behaviorally defined conditions that were expected to elicit specific emotions. Then they had those photographs rated by dog experts, and then they used those rated photographs as stimuli for people who were both experienced and inexperienced with dogs. And what they found was that both groups, experienced and inexperienced people, were able to read the dog's emotions from the dog's facial expression. So paradoxically, experienced people were less accurate regarding aggressiveness. I have no answer for that, but that's interesting. And experienced people were better at identifying behaviorally defined situations. But the bottom line is everybody was successful. So that's what's really important for us as trainers and as dog behavior consultants, is that even inexperienced people were successful at doing this. The first person to make public statements about the similarities of human and animal facial expressions was Charles Darwin in 1872 in his book, The Expression of Emotion in Man and Animals. Since then, Paul Ekman and others have determined that there are 6 universal facial expressions: surprise, anger, disgust, fear, happiness, and sadness. And DogNostics making the statement that we believe that these 6 universal facial expressions and more exist in dogs, as is now supported by that study that I just cited. So here are some interesting pictures from real life. This is Zeus. He was found by a client of mine. He was severely dehydrated and almost dead. And this is a picture early on when my client first was able to get him into our backyard. He was dangerously reactive, and you can see he's got a real hard stare and very stiff body here. And this is Zeus after about 10 hours of empowerment training. He's been given, of course, wonderful nutrition. He's no longer dehydrated, so his physical needs are met. Also, his needs for safety have been met. And this is him for the first time choosing to interact with me. I simply sat on the ground. I did not solicit his attention in any way, and he chose to sit on me and request petting. So here's one of the universal expressions, sadness. On the left we see a human, on the right we see a dog, and it's very clear that the facial expression is very similar. Here we have surprise, and again the facial expression is very similar. Here we have anger. Notice the wrinkling of the nose in both beings, the furrowing of the brow in both beings, and the aggressive pucker in both beings. Here we have disgust. This is a human on the left and my Bella on the right, and the way that we prompted or elicited, I should say, this emotional reaction was I held an orange rind in front of her, and she despises orange, and so when I held the orange rind in front of her, I moved it away, and the photographer snapped the disgusted expression. Here's fear. Again, very similar. And here's happy. All right, and here we have a dog. This is a baseline facial expression. So according to this owner, this is how the dog normally looked around the house while she was shock collar training. And she says she was a very heavy-handed shock collar trainer. She would hit the button 50, 60 times in a session. So this dog was receiving a lot of shocks. And this, she says, was his typical facial expression around the house during that time period. This is his baseline facial expression after he no longer is receiving shocks. A big difference. I'm going to go back just for a moment. So you see a furrowed brow, a harder look, a tighter mouth, and here you see a softer eye, much more relaxed muscles all over the face, and an open mouth. Dramatic difference. This dog's quality of life has been massively improved by her changing her training methods. So, how do we check in with dogs? We do an individual ethogram for the signs of stress and signs of joy. We use consent testing, and then of course the two-way communication. If your dog is happy, you're on the right track. If you see signs of stress, you know you need to modify the environment. Like some humans, dogs can have flat affect, and what that means is they just don't have a lot of emotionality, they don't have a lot of expression, and that's an important thing to be aware of because those dogs and those people are all around us. We need to have a little bit of information to be able to deal with them. So that's what this is about here. So if dogs' needs are not met, just like humans, they're going to stop showing emotions. So people who have gone to mass orphanages in countries that don't have a lot of economic resources will comment on how haunting it is to walk into a huge room of infants and none of the infants are crying. And the reason they have stopped crying is because their needs are not met. Crying is never, ever responded to by getting food or getting held or having their diaper changed, so the behavior extinguishes. So the same thing can happen with dogs. So in your manual, you're going to find a whole bunch of pictures, and you can use those pictures to visual expressions in all dogs in your human clients and start your own collection of pictures. Please feel free to share your pictures. I always love to see pictures of facial expressions. And all of that can help all of us get better at reading body language and facial expressions. So emotionality and development are intertwined. Development is going to affect an animal's ability to feel, emote, and express, and then consequently bond. So this brings us to a famous researcher, Harry Harlow, who was very well known for a love experiment that basically he had these little tiny monkeys, and by today's standards this study would be unethical. But what he did is half the monkeys got the wire mom that's pictured at left, and half the monkeys got the cloth mom that's pictured at right. And unlike popular thinking at the time, the cloth mother was significantly more popular with the little monkeys. So the surrogate mother study is the really famous one that Harlow did, and they were really interested in the physical care and physical needs of infant monkeys and, of course, subsequently humans. And when the researchers nursery-reared infants, they noticed that they were very different from the mother-reared animals. And of course we know that today parrots that were hand-raised by humans are not going to be as psychologically stable as parrots raised by parrots, so on and so forth. We know that dogs that are separated from their mothers or from their siblings prior to the age of 7 weeks in medium and large dogs, or even younger in small breeds, are going to have issues. So they noticed that these infants that had been nursery reared were slightly strange, they were reclusive, they had social deficits, and they clung to their cloth diapers. So this whole cloth diaper thing is what prompted him to do the monkey experiment. And overwhelmingly, the monkeys preferred spending time clinging to the cloth mother. So even only when the wire mother provided nourishment, the monkeys wanted. So this is really important, and it shows that if a dog is subjected to poor mothering, I have had several clients who we knew conclusively the puppies were subjected to very bad mothering. For example, the mother had to wear a muzzle, or in another case the mother played with the puppies as if they were toys, and it was very apparent that all the puppies were very stressed out by the presence of the mother. And in both cases the dogs grew up to have significant anxiety disorders and aggression and lots and lots of stress issues. So as previously stated, separating dogs from mom and or siblings prior to 7 weeks or later for small dogs will cause behavioral problems. The ones that we're aware of are separation distress, phobias, and reactivity with other dogs. And of course the big one is the bite inhibition. That can be really dangerous to humans. If a dog is not expressive, it obviously can be the result of development, but it can also be the result of learned helplessness or forceful training. So again, an animal that's punished or neglected even can just stop expressing any sort of emotionality. So here's another really interesting study. This just came out. It's an open access journal, so anybody can pull this off the internet. What they did was they compared dogs to 4-year-old children, and these are the researchers listed here, and they wanted to determine where the dogs looked to read human facial expressions. And the really fascinating result was that both the dogs and the 4-year-old children did a bilateral gaze, meaning that they, when they looked at humans, they looked at a certain part of their face. And that shows that dogs understand that we show our emotions in our faces. So this is very exciting research. So not only can we read their emotions in their face, but they read our emotions in our faces. So that leads us to the obvious: emotional contagion. Making feelings work for you. Emotional contagion is the tendency to automatically mimic and synchronize facial expressions, vocalization, postures, and movements with those of another person or being, in this case dog, and consequently to converge emotionally. So I got a question for you guys. How do you feel when your dog plays? Almost all of us feel really good. Think about the amount of money that people spend on making their dogs happy. It brings people joy to see their dog joyful. So that is emotional contagion. And also think about, how do you feel when your dog has a painful procedure at the vet? Many owners cry or are very upset or distraught, or even take the day off work if their dog has to have a medical procedure. So here's a picture that reflects happy emotional contagion. So you see a happy person and you see happy dogs. And in this case, we don't know who was happy first, but everybody's very happy. And here we have a sad person and an empathetic dog. So, how does emotional contagion work? The sender is the first being that experiences a feeling. The sender creates a facial expression. The receiver sees that expression. The receiver then either mentally or physically mimics the expression and is then able to empathize and share that feeling with the person that was sending the emotion. So this is how empathy works. Why emotional contagion? Why is this part of canine communication? It's an extremely important part of canine communication because your emotional state affects the client. If you have a bad attitude about your client, that's going to translate into your body language, and that's going to affect your consult. If you're making judgmental judgments about your client, that's going to translate into your emotional state, and that's going to affect your client. And it's going to affect your ability to work with that dog and to help that dog. So also, dog's emotional state is going to affect both the coach and the client. So it's really important to be aware of your own, the client's emotional state, and the dog's emotional state, and really try to shift all of those emotions into the same place to be ideally effective. This is especially true when you're working with problem behaviors or with aggression. So, if we're talking about sending and receiving information, then obviously it's possible to be a strong sender or not. So that's what we're going to discuss here. A strong sender of emotional information is going to have a very strong feeling. As a result of having a strong feeling, the person's going to have a strong expression, and they're going to be committed to that feeling and that expression, not allowing them to be derailed by another emotion that may be occurring, because they're strongly sending. So if you're strongly sending strong joy, you're showing a lot of joy in your body language and your facial expression, and if somebody's not quite as joyful or neutral, you're going to be unresponsive to that because you're trying to build up joy. You're trying to send joy out there and get joy back. Strong sending works for you if the emotion is positive, and it's going to work against you if the emotion is negative. That's why I said it's really important not to judge clients. It's really important not to feel angry if they've made a training mistake. Most clients are just doing the best they can, and they're doing what other people have told them they should do, which is often, not good advice. So if there's strong sending, then there's weak sending. So what's weak sending, and how does it fit in here? So if you are weak sending, you likely have a weak feeling, or you have a strong feeling and you're able to modify your send so that it comes across as weak. Some people just have weak expressions. Some people, as we just discussed, are not very expressive. And again, if you're a weak sender, you're probably going to be unresponsive to other emotions. If that's kind of your baseline, just weak sending, then you may be feeling strong emotions, but you may not be showing them in your facial expression. for the purposes of dog behavior consulting and dog training, it's really good if you're a strong sender. And if you are a weak sender, good news, you can work on becoming a strong sender. And keep working at it, because it's really important. You want to be able to sell joy to your clients. Weak sending, of course, can work for you if it's a negative emotion. If you're really feeling frustrated because the client has brought the dog on the prong collar and the dog is clearly very, very stressed out by wearing the prong collar, you want to not send that frustration to the client, because that's going to damage your reinforcement history with the client and make you less effective. And it's also going to possibly negatively affect the dog whom you're needing to build reinforcement history with, because the dog may not know why you're feeling frustrated, and the dog may personalize that feeling of frustration. So it's really important to minimize frustration and maximize fun. All right, strong receiving. So in order to be able to be open, you want to observe the body language of the beings around you. So the more that you are open to watching what you see and then using empathy to connect yourself to what they're feeling, the stronger you're going to receive information. Strong receiving is going to work for you as a coach, and it's going to work for you if the client catches the dog's emotion and yours if they're positive. So if the client is a strong receiver, that's really great, providing that you're getting a good stir of positive emotions going. It's going to work against you if you're sending negative emotions or if the dog is sending negative emotions. And often cases, oftentimes that's true when you're doing your first aggression consult. Can be a lot of negativity, so it can be a lot of hard work working your way out of that. Weak receiving, so a person that is not getting emotions, this may happen as a result of the emotions being sent not being very strong. So if there's weak feelings being sent, then obviously there's going to be weak receiving. If the person receiving doesn't express the emotions very well for themselves, then that can be a problem. People who are very self-centered, which is not usually people who work as dog trainers and dog behavior consultants, because usually those people are pretty obsessed with helping other people and dogs. Anyway, they can be weak receivers. Weak receivers are going to be unresponsive to other emotions and be very responsive to their own emotions. And this isn't necessarily bad, because if the owner's being very negative and you're trying to build up some fun and get some good stuff going, it can be a really good thing that you're a weak receiver in that context. So really, all of these things have their strengths and weaknesses. All right, so weak receiving works for you if the emotions are negative, works against you if the emotions are positive, because you're closed. So here is an emotional contagion study. It showed empathetic-like responding by dogs to the distress in humans. This is an interesting study. It was basically a study that was done with children, and they replicated it with dogs just to see if the dogs would show empathy. And the result was that, yes, dogs showed empathy, although the researchers called it emotional contagion specifically, not empathy, but in my opinion, it's chicken-egg situation. You can't have empathy without emotional contagion, and you can't have emotional contagion with empathy, without empathy. So anyway, the strangers would pretend to cry, and rather than approaching their usual source of comfort, the dogs sniffed, nuzzled, and licked the stranger. So they showed empathy to the stranger. And so here we see an example of a human-to-dog emotional contagion that is happiness. Nikki's going to post the link again. This is the 6th video. There's the link, and I will see you guys in a couple of seconds. Okay. So one of the things with emotional contagion that's really important is you can check in with humans. With a human, you do have the ability to verbally communicate, and so you can ask them. So if your client is getting teary-eyed, you can say, I'm noticing you seem upset. And then you can ask them what's going on for them. You can say things like, I noticed you grabbed your arm when I said that. Or you can ask them, would you be willing to share how you're feeling right now? These are really important things. We need to understand the emotional connection between a dog and their owner in order to be effective. So checking in with dogs, again, individual ethogram, consent testing, and two-way communication, which we can use the signs of stress and signs of joy, but also the look game. And finally, we can use canine vocal communications to help understand our furry clients. Yelps, barks, and whines do all mean things. So there's lots of research available on canine vocalizations. It's really interesting. It's a heavily researched thing. And here's a really interesting one. Dogs barking in specific situations, and what they found was that there were 3 different situations: a doorbell situation, an isolation situation where the dog was locked outside, and a play situation. And a statistical analysis revealed that the barks are graded vocalizations that range from harsh, low frequency, unmodulated calls to harmonically rich, higher frequency modulated calls. And low frequency barks were more commonly given in the disturbance situation, the doorbell, and higher pitched modulated barks were more commonly given in the isolation and play situations. So disturbance barks were also longer in duration with more rapid repetition than the barks given in other contexts. So then they did another study on intentional behavior in dog and human communication where let me go to the next slide. The research placed a piece of food in a situation where the dog couldn't get access to it. And then they wanted to see if the dog would basically ask for help. And what they found was that when both the food or the toy, depending on what the dog wanted, and the owner were present, there was a behavior that occurred of gaze alternation. So alternation. So what that means is that the dog would look at the owner and then at the toy or the food, and at the owner and then toy or the food, like, hello, like, could you help me out here? I can't get this. And then vocalizations that occurred in this phase were always associated with the gazing at the owner and the location of food. So clearly the gaze alternation and the vocalizations were attempts to communicate with the owner, hey, could you help me out here and get this for me? And so anyway, so that's an interesting study. And then this one showed humans being able to recognize the types of barks that a dog makes. And so this is kind of the culmination of the other two studies that now we're showing that human listeners can actually classify what the barks mean. And so anyway, various barks were recorded in different, and they were associated with emotional ratings. And this slide gives you some more detail that you guys can read through that later. You're going to get a copy of this presentation. And the authors found almost no effect of previous experience with the given dog breed or of owning a dog. So again, people who were naive were able to do this. And listeners were able to categorize bark situations high above chance level. Humans' ability to recognize meaning suggests that barks could serve as an effective means of communication between dog and human. Of course, we know that this is already happening. So here's one on emotionality and barking. So again, they found that the acoustic type of bark carries emotional information for humans. And what they found was that low hoarse sounds are positively correlated with aggression, and high-pitched sounds are more indicative of fear. So ultimately, people with different levels of experience were asked to match barks with aggressiveness, fear, despair, playfulness, and happiness. And the selection of barks was based on low, medium, and high values of tonality and peak frequency. And again, there was shifts in intervals, in the inner bark intervals. So they found that humans with different levels of experience with dogs described the emotional content of the bark sequences quite similarly. In general, the tonality of the bark sequence had much less effect than the pitch. So people were able to identify low-pitched barks as aggressive and high-pitched barks as either fearful or desperate, but without aggressiveness. So again, barking is communication. It's really important to pay attention to it. High-pitched bark sequences with long inner bark intervals were considered happy and playful, and the findings of the study suggest that dog barks present a functional system for communication in the dog-human relationship, and I would wholeheartedly agree with that. So again, make sure you check in with dogs. I've met dogs that had, for their size, very low-pitched barks, and also when they were playful, their bark was just relatively low pitch. So there's always a need to analyze each individual. My mom had a female Jack Russell that had one of the lowest barks I've ever heard, and a lot of people startled when she just barked her normal bark, and they thought it was kind of aggressive, but she was one of those raspy females. And then my mom had a male Jack Russell who had a very high-pitched bark, and who almost sounded puppy-like when he barked. So there's always room for individual differences, and so it's always important to know the individual, use the consent testing, and the two-way communication. So here's the final section of this presentation. This is something I'm really excited about. It's called picture communication, and I think this is going to be the future for a lot of dog training someday, especially as our iPads get more and more involved in dog training. So this is how to use a picture board to communicate with dogs. What is a picture board? A picture board is a board that has pictures on it that is used with humans that are nonverbal in order to communicate. And so, what happened was nonverbal beings would need something, and they had no way of saying what they needed. And they'd get very frustrated. They'd have bursts of anger, and their emotions would be very difficult to manage for all parties involved because they just didn't have a means of communicating. So somebody came up with picture communication. So a nonverbal child can use this board and point at what it is that they need. So Victoria Fogel, who is a professor at the University of South Florida, specifically behavior analysis, works with autistic kids, and she uses picture communication with kids. So she thought, well, it'd be really nice to use this with my dog. So what she created is a picture board for her dog that had laminated plastic cards on them that the dog could pull off the Velcro picture board and bring to her and request what she wanted. And so here you see this picture communication occurring. Connor wants water, and Nikki's going to post the link for video 7 in the chat box. There it is, and I will be back in a moment. Okay, and here Connor wants a treat. So this is video 8. Nikki will post this link in the box in a moment, and then I'll be back after you guys have had a chance to watch it. There it is, video 8. Okay, and here is a video that shows Connor verifying. So in the previous video you just saw, she wanted a treat, and here they verify the card. So one of the things that you need to do to maintain your training is to make sure that that card still means the same thing to that particular animal. So in this video you're going to see Connor verify that yes, she wanted a treat, and you'll see how she does that. So this is video 9. This is the last video. Nikki has cut and pasted the link, and you guys are ready to watch, and I'll be right back. All righty. So here we go, canine communication homework. You guys need to please read the Canine Behavior and Social Communication Manual. It's quite long. After you read the manual, you're going to take the self-test. So it's really important that you do not take the test until after you've read the manual, because the test is on all 3 parts of this presentation and the manual. You need to complete and submit the lists, signs of stress and signs of joy for a specific dog. It can be one of your dogs. It can be a client's dog. The list is in the manual, and the ideas for helping you create the list is in the manual. And then you need to prepare 2 videos. The first video is approximately 30 seconds of a consent test, and it can be your choice of either a dog-dog consent test, and then you interpret the result, or a dog-human consent test, and again you interpret the result. And then there's a second video that's also approximately 30 seconds of a human to dog emotional contagion. So here I want to see you guys get an animal happy. Let me see you get a dog really happy, okay? So I look forward to seeing what you guys come up with, and thanks for letting me play with you today, and happy canine communication.